On July 9, 2024, Michael Pacheco was charged for the murder of Guillermo Ramirez, whom he fatally shot in a Days Inn motel parking lot 19 days prior. Homicide detectives determined that Pacheco was upset and accused his girlfriend of having a relationship with Ramirez. Witnesses and surveillance identified Pacheco as he fled the scene in a black Jeep SUV he was known to drive. Detectives tracked the Jeep to the home of Pacheco's ex-girlfriend, in which during a search, investigators found a firearm and details suggesting Pacheco was receiving mail at the home. He was charged with an open counter murder and tampering with evidence. On October 22, 2016, Lisa Pacheco called 911 to report a domestic disturbance at the home of her mother, Patricia Pacheco. Lisa said that her brother Michael was kicked out of her mom's home about 3 to 4 weeks earlier because he refused to seek assistance for a suspected drug issue. They were fearful of him because Pacheco was known to have weapons, had threatened to kill Patricia, and had shot at her in the past. Pacheco had returned to Patricia's home without permission on 3 occasions since being kicked out. The first time, he broke in through a window, then through the back door, and then again through the garage. At about 1:42 p.m., APD officers met with Lisa and Patricia at Jimmy Carter Middle School at their request, because Pacheco was still at Patricia's house. When asked whether or not Pacheco had committed any violence that day, Patricia stated that he pointed his finger like a gun in her direction. Police later learned that about 4 to 5 months prior, Pacheco shot at Patricia while inside the house, and later repaired the hole in the wall where the bullet had struck. Patricia never called the police to report it because Pacheco threatened that if she were to call the cops, someone will get shot. Lisa reported that Pacheco had become progressively more violent with her mother, and believed that he acted as if he was on narcotics. Patricia and Lisa had recently observed Pacheco in possession of a handgun and a rifle, and believed that he was not supposed to have guns because he was a convicted felon. Detectives ran Pacheco's name through and reported that he had a felony conviction for forgery. Pacheco was later arrested after attempting to flee and collided with officers in a vehicular chase. His criminal history revealed that Michael Pacheco was a 29-year-old male with numerous police contacts as of October 22, 2016. In 2006, he was indicted for the charges of false imprisonment and battery against a household member. In 2007, he was indicted for the charges of false imprisonment, aggravated assault against a household member, and violation of a protective order. In a separate case in 2007, he was charged with battery against a household member, use of the telephone to harass and intimidate, possession of a controlled substance, and failure to appear. In 2016, he was charged with attempt to commit a felony, to wit, forgery of a credit card, and he pled guilty in 2017.
I hope that these cases, these examples, serve as a microcosm for a broader issue, that the crisis of firearm violence stems from anywhere. Proper reformations aren't enforced, and because of that, people suffer. So how does it continue to happen? Why do we allow people to die? The reasons are really lame. As it stands, 79% of all homicides in the U.S. involve a gun.
With nearly all U.S. states having a higher firearm mortality rate than most other countries, death rates due to physical violence by firearm in U.S. states are closer to rates seen in countries experiencing active conflict. Nationally, 46,686 people on average are killed by guns every year, leaving 96,935 wounded with surviving injuries, a rate of 29.2 injuries and 13.8 deaths per 100,000 people. In secularism statistics, we learned that 40% of that average are by gun homicide, with 57% being from gun suicide.
That's a meaty number, a lot of death from both self-inflicted and imposed violence. Why?
According to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, socioeconomic, geographic, and racial inequalities,
as well as the associations between such factors, contribute to firearm violence outcomes and exposure.
Structural factors that significantly increase risk of experiencing firearm violence include poverty, living in an area with low social mobility, or being a historically marginalized group impacted by structural racism.
More specifically, a 1 standard deviation increase in upward social mobility was related to a 25% reduction in the firearm homicide rate, with increased institutional social capital being linked to a 17% decrease in the number of firearm homicide incidents.
An increase in socioeconomic status by 1 standard deviation has been associated with a 31% reduction in firearm suicide risk among men. Comparatively, the increase in labor percentages of residents living in poverty and males living alone were associated with up to 27 and 12% higher firearm-related homicide rates, respectively. Regarding geographic factors, firearm homicide rates are generally higher in urban areas, and firearm suicide rates are often higher in rural areas. Data analyzed from the Big Cities Health Coalition reported a total of 67,000 firearm deaths from 2010 to 2021 in 35 member cities,
66% of which were homicides and 32% being suicides.
Furthermore, in a cross-sectional study from 2011 to 2020, the most rural counties had a 76% higher firearm-related suicide rate and a 46% lower firearm-related homicide rate compared to the most urban counties.
Though in discussing the contributing factors to the crisis, the lethality, availability of, and access to firearms needs to be acknowledged.
As the presence of a firearm in the home has been associated with a higher risk of being a victim of homicide, and suicide among all household members, and an unlocked firearm in the home is associated with a higher risk of suicide and unintentional firearm injury among children and adolescents. Studies suggest a fatal outcome is more likely when a firearm is used in a violent situation or in a suicide attempt rather than other methods. Acts of violence and suicide attempts often involve a rapid transition from thought to action, and access to a firearm during a time of acute stress can lead to deadly outcomes, with some suicide attempt survivors report that they acted within minutes or hours of deciding to end their lives.
Suicide happens to be one of the top leading causes of death in the U.S. for individuals ages 10 to 64. While mental health is an important risk factor for suicide, many people who die by suicide do not have a known mental health condition. As such, people who die by suicide may not come to the attention of health workers when effective prevention interventions can be delivered. Research shows that negative life events such as family relationship problems, job-related stress, physical health issues, and financial or legal problems are common circumstances of suicide, including among those without a mental health diagnosis.
While the relationship between mental illness and suicide risk is complex, it's clear that access to a firearm can immediately shape a moment of crisis into a fatal one. As firearm storage practices vary widely among firearm owners, a 2022 survey found that among firearm owners, most of whom owned more than one firearm, 65%, 71% used one type of storage or locking device on at least one firearm, but 65% reported at least one unlocked firearm. Even among firearm owners with children, findings from a national survey in 2021 suggest that 36% have unlocked firearms. Additionally, according to a 2023 CDC analysis, 56% of unintentional firearm deaths among children and adolescents happened while they were in their own home, and approximately 2/3 of shooters were playing with or showing the firearm to others when it discharged. The firearms used in these unintentional deaths were often stored loaded and unlocked, and were most commonly accessed from sleeping areas such as nightstands, under a mattress pillow, or on a bed.
I don't believe it can be stressed anymore that there is a clear casualness that comes from individuals who own these weapons.
How there's like this sort of commodification in these firearms akin to that like a Milwaukee like impact drill. Like it's as if they're perceived like in the same sense as like that of a tool, instead of regarded with the ethical way that they really carry.
Shooting incidents, including those in homes, schools, houses of worship, workplaces, shopping areas, on the street, or at community events, can affect the sense of safety and security of entire communities and impact everyday decisions. In relation to said incidents taken from the CDC, survivors of firearm-related injury may experience long-term consequences.
Problems with memory, thinking, emotions, physical disability from damage to the brain, and paralysis from spinal cord injuries.
Also included are chronic mental health problems from conditions such as PTSD. To reiterate on an earlier point, 96,935 people are left wounded by firearms on average every year.
As economically, gun violence costs the U.S. $557.2 billion each year, of which $12.6 billion is paid by taxpayers,
An average cost of $1,698 per person. Pulling back from the financial element, I believe it's important to focus on the human cost, though.
According to everystat.org, since January 2017, there have been 317 homicides of transgender individuals in America, 73% being gun victims. Nationally, 901 women are fatally shot by a partner each year, with 77% of intimate partner homicide gun victims being women. And on average, nationally, 4,418 children and teens die by guns every year, with 29% of deaths caused by suicide and 65% by homicide. Dozens mention that African American children or teens are specifically 6 times more likely than other peers to die by guns. So, on a congressional and judiciary level, why isn't any of this being acted on? Why isn't there immediate reform or effort to initiate any kind of change? Conservative lawmakers have largely balked at the kind of gun control proposals the Law Center supports. In December 2023, Senate Republicans blocked efforts by their Democratic colleagues to ban assault weapons and mandate universal background checks, measures that a vast majority of Americans support, polling shows.
Senator John Barrasso, Republican from Wyoming, accused Democrats of trying to ban certain semi-automatic firearms because of the way they look, and said rifles such as the AR-15 work the same way as popular shotguns and other rifles used for hunting and personal protection. A similar dynamic continues to play out at the state level, where Democrats in several states passed new firearm restrictions, while Republicans in other states blocked such measures, though we should acknowledge the change that has been implemented. In January 2024, new restrictions went into effect in various states, limiting the types of weapons available, who could access them, and how quickly people could purchase guns, as well as permitting firearms to be temporarily taken from people who pose a risk to themselves or others. In Illinois, selling or manufacturing high-powered rifles such as AR-15s and AK-47s in the state became prohibited. Minnesota became the 21st state to implement a red flag law, which permits family members or police to remove firearms from people who are determined by a judge to pose a risk to themselves or others. Washington began requiring gun buyers to undergo background checks and take a gun safety class. Colorado began requiring ghost guns to get serial numbers, and purchasers undergo background checks, a law later upheld by a federal judge. In February 2024, some of the most comprehensive gun control legislation in the nation took effect in Michigan.
Following the 2021 Oxford High School shooting in suburban Detroit, in which 4 teenagers died, and a 2023 shooting at Michigan State University, the legislature passed a series of new gun safety measures, including requiring adults to lock firearms if it is reasonably known that a minor could likely be present, subjecting all firearm buyers to universal background checks, decreeing that people convicted of domestic violence cannot purchase, own, or transport guns within 8 years of their sentencing. In May 2024, Delaware Governor John Carney, a Democrat, signed legislation requiring handgun purchasers to complete safety training and pass a background check before buying weapons. The legislature has attempted to pass the bill for 6 years, requiring a person to obtain a firearm license and training before purchasing the actual firearm. It's important to note that research from the Johns Hopkins Center has found such laws have been associated with reductions in violence, as well as after Connecticut passed handgun licensing legislation in 1995, the state's homicide rate dropped 28%, and its suicide rate 33% from 1996 to 2017, prompting new calls for gun restrictions.
In April 2024, the Biden admin announced a new rule requiring firearms dealers to conduct background checks before completing a gun sale, and would apply to tens of thousands of transactions each year. Numerous states sued to block the rule from taking effect. In May, a federal judge in Texas issued a temporary restraining order blocking the measure in that state, and among members of gun rights groups who joined the suit. Republicans in Congress continued to push for fewer restrictions around guns. According to the Gun Violence Archive, that same year, there were 502 mass shootings, 16,900 deaths, and 31,830 injuries. So, in our findings, we can assess that this problem is bigger than bad guys somehow obtaining guns. Our culture, American culture, is so ingrained with this eerie fixation on guns and their capabilities. Because of media, pop culture, social climates, and attitudes, we've formed like a romanticization in such weapons. They're treated like a new car, something gaudy, a display of strength, almost. It's borderline fetishization considering the moral implications that these devices instill. And in some respect, I can understand owning firearms inherently for protection, but in interpreting our constitutional amendments, there are limitations. Call it a stretch, but I don't believe there's credence in owning high-caliber weapons. The justified consensus within these fixations seem to come from a place of virtue, LARPing, if you will, playing up this role of armed patriot in defense of the motherland when the most likely suspects causing such incidents are violent, homegrown U.S. citizens. We just looked at the math. Firearm negligence exists because of incompetence, both judicial and cultural. Desensitization is intentionally perpetuated, and if we've learned anything, it's that the violence isn't inevitable, but preventable.
It always has been. It would just take a heavy slap in the face for the U.S. to recognize that people matter more than ideals.